It seems like that group overall just hates Jewish people, and like it's the religion that does it that makes them hate Jewish people.
Well,
No, it's
also real
literally
quick,
their brand of
real
Christianity.
quick, like
It's one of the most
Orthodoxy,
militant
like
ones.
how much, like when we say Orthodoxy, there's actually like three separate groups, like Eastern, Oriental, and the Eastern Church of the East. Now I'm not to think of like how what's the demographic like of those three major churches, and then within those
Yeah, but I
within
mean, those
Eastern
distinctions really
Orthodox.
don't matter as much because their numbers are small.
Okay, yeah.
Uh, there's what,
I
70
mean, if
million
I
in
could
Eastern.
also add,
Whenever
if
No,
I
people
no,
make
think
that
about
distinction, like, oh,
all
there's different types of Orthodox, and it's like only like a
real
few ten
quick.
thousand people or some shit, and it's just like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, the overall all the three different like churches I mentioned all fitting under like Orthodoxy. That's just 10% of all of the 2.4 billion Christians.
The Orthodox are basically Eastern Protestants.
Pretty much.
Protestants with
Mhm.
valid sacraments.
Yeah, Protestants with apostolic succession.
Yeah, I mean,
Protestants
that
reject both.
Oh, oh,
they're what
oh no,
happens with
hold
bishops.
on.
They're what
Wait,
Back
happens
to
with
back.
they're what
apostolic
happens.
succession?
Oh my God, they're what happens when bishops leave union with like the Pope.
So abysmal, real quick. That documentary also like kind of fueled my thing where like all the other religions and thought like schools of thought focus on the self, focus on like the material, and then the Catholic Church focuses on God.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
like, what we
where
did
these
was,
the and you can see that through the shift from need to desire, need to want.
hmm
Yeah,
that's the whole project of psychoanalysis. So that's kind of like what the church is up against after the turn of the century. Turn of the century, because a lot of this happened within the German schools of philosophy in the 1850s and 1860s.
blame it on Martin Luther. Wait, say that year again.
No, I wouldn't blame it on Martin Luther. It
No,
all
hold
started.
on. I'm a conspiracy theorist right now by blaming everything, every bad thing in the world on Martin Luther. Okay, you say German Martin Luther. Okay, I'm sorry. Go on. What year was that?
Okay, so if you know anything about the history of phenomenology, it all started with a Jewish priest. I mean, not a Jewish priest. What the hell am I talking about? A Jesuit priest. That was a
The
Freudian
Okay,
slip.
Jesuits.
I was kind of confused
Yeah.
what you said by
So there
Jewish
was a
priest.
Jesuit priest named Franz Brentano. Okay, and then he left the Jesuit priesthood. He became an apostate, and then he's the guy who started phenomenology. He taught Husserl and Freud.
Hmm.
Oh,
Yeah, and then
that's
Husserl
great.
starts giving lectures and starts teaching. His student is Martin Heidegger, and Pierce and Meinong also attended some of his seminars. Those are the semioticians.
Dude,
So they go
I
off
just
and make.
realized it really is a like a like like in the Catholic Church, it's not like like royal bloodlines. It's like schools
Of thought. Yep, precisely.
bloodlines. You know what I'm saying? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, from teacher to student.
Yep. These are all so you kind of had like a fracturing from like religious in the even within like the religious academies during the scholastic period with William of Ockham. So William of Ockham is literally the one that leads to kind of this categorical skepticism of conventions that leads to Descartes later in the 1600s. William of
So,
Ockham is like the father of nominalism, right? So, but
There's so many different schools.
but then Freud, he starts doing like his own phenomenology, which he calls psychoanalysis. And then his student was Carl Jung, and Carl Jung was a critic of Freud. So Freud didn't, or so Freud's basic thesis was that I mean, that video is going to talk about it, but it has to do with the whole like
Yeah.
libidinal like forces and stuff, right? So for Freud, at the heart of like what motivates people, everything is kind of like reducible basically down to like fear and sex. Okay. That we have like these primal fears and we have these primal sex drives that we're always repressing. And it's a matter about how do we control those animalistic or primal forces. Carl Jung later comes along and criticizes this and says, no, this that fear and that primal urge comes from our collective unconscious. So then he kind of goes in the opposite direction and says that that's not really what the self is. Um, what Freud's talking about is just kind of like the trauma of our past. So two kind of different psychoanalytical
It almost seems like
methods
Carl
that
Jung
kind of
is focusing on the individual and Ford is focusing on the
well, they're both
collective.
focusing on the individual. They just have two different psycho theories
Right.
or whatever. Like the whole premise
No,
behind
you
psychoanalysis is to try to provide like a material or because it's a self-proclaimed scientific approach, right? It's nothing more than a pseudoscience really because they're studying the mind and the mind is not material. But their presumption is they're going to study it as if there is a material explanation for all psychic phenomenon.
so abysmal. You're like pro Freud or something.
No, I'm pro neither.
I
What
was
makes you
actually
think that I'm
having,
pro
Oh
Freud?
Jesus.
but let me just
Hey,
ask this
Pro
Abysmal,
question
Jesus.
because I made the mistake. Okay, I won't talk abysmal.
no, no, it's not that. It's like, so are you pro Freud rather than asking me at least like a layup question, right? Do you not have a clarifying question or something? Or are you just shooting from the hip all the time?
Sorry. So my
So
question is,
I
I made the mistake of studying psychology, and then I saw that a lot of the things psychology teaches is blatantly incompatible with my Catholic faith.
Yep. Well, because
So,
Mhm.
like,
again, the whole premise is that they're going to assume that it is a real science and that psychic phenomenon can be explained by material causation.
so you think that there's no like practical use for psychology?
No, it's just a pseudoscience because the problem of the mind still persists today. But here's the thing, like I
it's
come
just a
from
theory.
more yeah, I come from more of like a phenomenological approach. So I would probably more on the thread of like Edmund Husserl in his approach because phenomenology isn't the same thing as psychoanalysis.
Psychology is a scam.
It is.
So
Most
wait,
people are drawn
is
to
there
go.
no I'm like so like is there no like that's why I always wonder about like psychology. Like what are the stats on like seems like it's like so vague, psychology. Like what does it produce? What good does it do? That's what I always wondered.
Would there be a difference between, I guess, psychiatry and psychiatry? Psychology, sorry, and psychiatry.
Psychiatrists,
Yeah.
yes. There's they're different doctors, I
Well,
guess you would
yeah,
say, a
I know that, but
psychiatrist and a
I'm
psychologist.
just asking. Like, is it just in the realm of just like Freud and Jung in terms of just psychoanalysis as opposed to like
There's others as
diagnosing
well. Like I mean,
disorders? Well,
I'm
yeah,
I'm
of
well
course,
versed
yeah.
into yeah.
But I'm just like those were the two prominent in this discussion, so I'm
Yeah.
pulling on those. But
What would be the most
in
prominent
terms of
generally speaking?
in terms of just psychological disorders such as like just ADHD, for example, or an anxiety thing, would
Yeah,
that
so
would
here's what so I mentioned phenomenology, right? So are you familiar with the phenomenologists?
I am not, no.
Okay. Well, if you so basically the phenomenologists basically lead into what is known today as cognitive research.
Hmm.
Cognitive science is going to require knowledge or study or discipline within neuroscience. and then you could call something like what you're doing a cognitive science. But for phenomenological purposes, there's something called cognitive research. Okay, and so that's a thread that is actually more prevalent today, especially in the past like 40 years, because the majority of cognitive research is going to be supported by advertising companies and advertising firms. Um, they're the number one funder for cognitive research.
Hmm.
So like it's really come down to the point where they're able to identify which colors trigger certain type of patterns or associations in people, and for obvious reasons advertisers take advantage of this in order to influence their marketing decisions. So like if you
They
look, so what they'll do is they'll
is it even down to like those posters that get like um that correlate beer and like political party,
Beer.
like your beer choice and your politics
I mean, I
choice.
think that's all just ideological, but like, it's not an accident that a lot of fast food companies are going to use red. Red
Hmm.
has specific
Right. And tech
signifiers and
companies
associations
using
attached
blue.
to it. Yeah, red, um, red as opposed to green, right? Red also means stop, but what it triggers in people is speed. So then
Hmm.
fast food companies, it's no surprise that they're going to start using a lot of red, whether it's Wendy's, Jack in the Box, even Burger King.
And
Burger King is a little bit more
is
obvious in
this
the
the
commercials.
science that got us information that like yellow rooms make babies cry more often?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the number one funder for this type of research, it isn't colleges, universities, or even the government. It's advertising firms.
That makes sense. That
Yeah.
does not surprise me for some reason.
So we're like way past Freudian psychoanalysis or theories, or even Jungian psychoanalysis. We're way beyond that at this point.
Hmm.
The reason why I brought up the phenomenologist is because most of the critics are going to come of both Freud and Jung are going to come from the phenomenologists. Phenomenologists don't question whether the mind is real. So the question there isn't to try to analyze what are the quote unquote material or efficient causes for the ways in which we think. So it's not a determinate way of looking at the processes of the mind. That project has already been exhausted. That was the whole point of like the monarch and mind control, um, call projects of the CIA in the 50s. They already did all of that. Like most of all of those cases are all declassified at this point. So it turns out that there's no way for us to really deterministically pinpoint how the mind is shaped, or how the mind works. It like there's no way for us to predetermine how a mind is going to think. So instead, what phenomenologists do or have done in cognitive research is just try to apply what is the state of a particular mind or groups of minds, and in the way that they perceive patterns or associations, rather.
Hmm.
So that's my long-winded of weighing of saying that, are there challenges to Freud and Carl Jung? Yes, obviously. Um, but the more substantive claims are going to come from cognitive research. There's more that we know now in the past 20 years than at any point prior to like the year 2000. Pretty much most of the assumptions prior to the year 2000 have been pretty much dispelled by cognitive research. Like the whole idea of a collective unconscious is just garbage.
In what way? Not like
Be-
as an like an antagonistic question, but just to further elaborate.
because we know the way our brain works now much better.
Mhm.
Like, you know, so are you familiar with the fact that the right and left side of the brain are not connected? Like they grow independently of each other, and they're only quote unquote connected through the corpus callosum at the bottom. So if I
I
were
did
to,
not know that.
yeah, if I were to cut
Hmm.
your skull, right, and pull your brain out, your left and side, if I didn't hold it together, they would just they would just split apart.
Yeah, but isn't there are what neurotransmitters I would, as kind of a layman kind of word to use that to connect them to,
So,
because there is at
you're
least there's
right,
communication between the two,
right at the
because
corpus
there's the split.
callosum,
Okay.
which is the base of the skull. That's where your pineal gland is.
Hmm.
Now, the corpus callosum is not brain matter. Well, I mean, it's technically part of the brain, but the way in which like you're gonna build neural pathways is through like building of synapses, right? There's no synaptic line between the left and right side of your brain. In
Hmm.
fact, your left and right side of your brain actually have different personalities as well. Are you familiar with that?
So you're talking about
I'm
the
I'm uh
brain
I'm familiar
vortex
about like
pyramid, where like they split the dude's
yeah,
brain
I
in
was about to
half,
say
and
I'm
they
familiar with
acted independently.
if
That's the thing.
familiar.
There
What I mean
are
by familiar is
cases
just like
where,
shallow level.
yeah, there are cases where, um, either because of accidents or as part of a procedure that they consented to, some people have had their corpus callosum literally cut. So they're no longer, their left and right brain is no longer talking or anything like that. Yet they're still able to function, and they have no explanation for this. Only that they either choose they're either going to be they're either going to choose one personality or the other, or one is going to be um, more pronounced to them, and the others they're never going to have communication with that side ever again. It's interesting. Rocket, this guy named
So
let me find the video.
they
Would it
they
be
can't they can't switch.
by sorry, what? Uh,
They can't switch what brain they use for the personality.
I'm gonna find him right now because he actually did the
I
research
was
for us.
I would more ask like
Wait, wait,
what
wait.
is it like a
Real
more
quick. Does this somehow imply that everyone has two personalities?
That's precisely what I'm telling you.
that kind of makes
Uh,
sense.
So we're gonna watch this video, okay?
How long?
as long as it needs, there's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
100,000 hours
Check
of
the stream. Check
research.
the stream.
Oh, 2 minutes. Okay.
Hold up.
So now let's get to the neurology. And one group of patients we have studied is split brain patients or commissurotomy patients. These are people whose corpus callosum has been cut, and anterior commissure and massa intermedia whenever encountered. So essentially, you're doing a karate chop right through the head and creating two human beings in one body, in one skull, two spheres of consciousness. Now, many experiments have been done on these people, and I asked myself a very simple question. Okay, you've created two people here. What about their personalities? Do they have different personalities? What about their aesthetic preferences? Does one like blondes and the other like brunettes, for example? One like chocolate and the other like vanilla? What happens? So we tried these experiments, and what we did was we had to first train the right hemisphere to communicate with us. In fact, the right hemisphere can read simple commands, simple words, simple sentences, and then you ask a question and say, point to a box, yes, no, I don't know, because it can't talk. The right hemisphere cannot talk. But it can comprehend simple semantics, simple questions. Left hemisphere, of course, can talk, so you can present boxes, yes, no, I don't know. So we asked, for example, are you at Caltech? And the right hemisphere pointed to yes. Are you on the moon? It said no. Are you in California? It said yes. Are you asleep? It said no. Then I said, are you a woman? And the patient was male. And he pointed to yes. And then started chuckling and laughing. So at least the right hemisphere has a sense of humor. Okay, so now comes the big question. What if you ask, do you believe in God? So I said, do you believe in God? And the right hemisphere went straight to yes. Right? Asked the same question to the left hemisphere, yes, no, I don't know. It went to no. Right? So here's a human being whose right hemisphere is an atheist, and left hemisphere, on the other hand, believes in God. And this finding should have sent a tsunami through the theological community, but barely produced a ripple, because it raises all kinds of profound theological questions. If this person dies, What happens? Does one hemisphere go to heaven and the other go to hell? I don't know the answer to that.
That is interesting.
Yep. There's more on this. We can kind of go through this later, but I want you to watch the Century of the Self first, Supreme. Like, I have a boatload of content that I want to get through down this conspiracy memory hole. Supreme, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, hold on a second for a moment. I'm not
So
prepared.
this is what I mean. We know a lot
Oh,
more
real quick.
from cognitive science.
Blah blah blah. I have to do my research if I'm the nicest person on the server. But yeah, I'll watch the documentary on that.
Like, not, you see, that's the thing. Like, not a lot of people understand that this is what's happening. But when we get, so the reason why phenomenology matters here and knowing what happened in the 18th century, again, the reason why I'm having you watch those videos, or I'd like you to, is because me, Grudgin, and Near and Far are talking about that during the late night conspiracy hour. Because they're asking all these questions about Vatican II. How did it get this far? You know what I mean? What can we do to fix it? And all this other blah, blah, blah. And I have to take them back and I have to go, okay, here's the history of psychoanalysis. We're watching these videos. Now and then, once we watch that, I can talk to them about phenomenology and tell them, okay, here were the leading thinkers of what phenomenology is, and I can take them through the phenomenological reduction and eidetic reduction, and then tell them, okay, so then there's a particular phenomenologist. He's the creator of metaphysical personalism. Okay, his name is Henry Bergson, and he's the first one that tries to posit this idea of there being a static religion and a dynamic religion. A lot
So,
of,
a religion.
yeah, Jacques Maritain and Garrigou Lagrange are both Thomists during that time that were students of Henry Bergson. They were not only students of Henry Bergson, they were also Thomists. And both Jacques Maritain and Garrigou Lagrange influence the revisionist kind of like Thomist movement of the Nouvelle Theologie, the new theology. So they were under the assumption that there's like a there's like a way of looking at religion in a static way, and there's a way of looking at a religion in a dynamic way. And they reread St. Thomas, and the progressives or liberals in the church criticize the Thomism of the old church as being too rigid and static, and they were trying to look for a more dynamic application of it. So then this starts to influence other Thomists like Henry de Lubac, Yves Congar, and then later the Jesuits like von Balthasar and Rahner also start getting their influence from de Lubac and Yves Congar. And then they start writing the theology that made up the new schema of Vatican II. But like I said, what we know now in the past 20 years when it comes to cognitive research pretty much dispels any other psychoanalytic theory before the year 2000.
All right, sorry, I wasn't able to use my microphone. Um, so like pretty much all psychoanalysis before the year 2000 is kind of garbage.
Pretty much.
It's funny.
But those assumptions were literally operative prior to the Vatican II Council and also influenced its theology.
What, okay, the theology that like like the mind is like a material thing in a sense.
What?
Like okay, what I'm probably to be looking more at the documentary, but like what part of like the psychoanalysis that really the dynamic religion part where you
I
can
mean, you're hearing all this for the first
yeah
time, so you're probably trying to wrap your
yeah
mind around it.
hmm
So, what I would suggest is you could read the Stanford summary and you can just go to point number, you don't need all the history, just go to point number 6.
oh hmm. Voluntary hallucinations. But I probably would read faster if like wasn't like